You're live. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this presentation on quiet parks. My name is Marci Mowery. I'm the president of the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation, and we're partnering with our friends over at the Keystone Trails Association to host this discussion this evening. A few little housekeeping tips before we begin. Throughout the presentation, if you would like to ask a question, you can post it in the comment box of whatever platform you're viewing this on. And we will be monitoring those, but we'll be holding all questions until the end. This presentation will also remain on the platform on which you're viewing it. So we encourage you after the presentation is over to share it with some friends. I think you're going to find tonight's topic to be very interesting. Here at the foundation, we've been excited about quiet parks and quiet in general for some time. I myself prefer quiet locations. I'm one of those people that noise seems to really bother me. And I realize that it's not just me. There are a lot of people that experience that same phenomenon as well. So excited to hear Matt's presentation tonight. But before we get to Matt, I'm going to introduce Brook Lenker, the Executive Director of Keystone Trails Association, to say a few words and then to introduce our guest.
Awesome.
Brook.
Thank you, Marci. And thanks to all of you who tuned in tonight for this program. Keystone Trails Association is a statewide organization that provides, protects, preserves, and promotes hiking trails and hiking opportunities in Pennsylvania. And as such, we greatly value quiet. It's, a sublime part of the hiking experience. I think quiet makes the most meaningful and restorative hiking experiences. You can only think that without the verdant sounds of nature, a hiking experience is diminished. But that's not the only reason that we value quiet. We at KTA, and I personally really value its importance to nature, to ecology. And I'm sure Matt will talk about this, but wildlife needs the canvas of quiet to hunt, to avoid being hunted, to find a mate, and so many other reasons. So anthropogenic or human-made noises disrupts that communication that's critical to all life. So for these and many other reasons, the work of Quiet Parks International is critically important and very pioneering too. So it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Matt Mikkelsen. And I just briefly want to give you a little bit of his biography. So Matt's the chairperson and executive director of Wilderness Quiet Parks for Quiet Parks International. And Matt is a sound recordist, audio engineer, documentary filmmaker based in Duluth, Minnesota. And he has worked as a sound designer, director, and producer on several award-winning documentary projects, and has devoted much of his professional career to observing, recording, researching, and preserving natural soundscapes. He's worked on all kinds of interesting projects with some big name communication mediums like National Geographic, NPR, and so on. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Matt Mikkelsen.
Wow, thank you so much, Brooke. I think you summed up the importance of quiet right there. That can be, there we go. The presentation is done. No, just kidding. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Thank you to everyone for having me, and to these great organizations for hosting this presentation. We really appreciate it. Without partners like yourselves, our work would be really hard to accomplish. So I think my kind of agenda for the evening is I'll tell you about myself and my work first, how I kind of found this work. I'll talk to you about the organization, Quiet Parks International. We'll talk to you about some places that are quiet and places that we hope to be able to call quiet, what quiet is, why it's important, and kind of dive more into what Brook was talking about there. So I think, I'm not sure if my slideshow is, there it is. Perfect. Okay, let me make sure. Great, I have it up here. I had said in this title slide to grab some headphones if you have them. I was hoping to play some sounds where I'm having some technical difficulties with that, so I don't know if we're going to be able to listen to some sounds. But headphones are nice anyway, kind of tune into the quiet we can cultivate right here. If you can see my camera, I'm clearly not in a house. I'm in a hotel room in Miami because I've just spent this past week out in the swamps of Florida.
Excuse me.
Recording the sounds of swamps for my job, which is a very interesting thing. I have a lot of mosquito bites on my face. Those bug shirts are great, but they are not 100% effective. I can tell you all about my favorite brands of bug spray. But alas, I have succumbed to some mosquito bites. So apologize the background that I have now, and apologies for the mosquito bites on my face. But I have this beautiful picture of a juvenile barred owl for you that was my friend yesterday morning as I was out in the swamps recording the sounds of nature. So like Brooke had mentioned, I currently live in Duluth, Minnesota, which is on the western tip of Lake Superior. But I grew up in New Jersey, right across the border from Easton, Pennsylvania. So I'm close to Pennsylvania. I spent a lot of time in Pennsylvania growing up. That's a place that's really close to my heart. Spent a lot of time hiking the Appalachian Trail in sections and the Delaware Water Gap, things like this. So Pennsylvania is a place that I've had the pleasure and the honor of exploring quite a bit. Hope to explore some more. I call myself a sound designer, a sound recordist. What do these things mean? How did I get here? It's an interesting story that I'll try to explain briefly. I came from a music background. I really wanted to be a musician. I wanted to be a drummer in a rock band, which is certainly not quiet. And at some point, as I started to maybe mature a little bit, I realized I didn't quite have the skill necessary to make it as a full-time musician. But I really loved the engineering side of music, recording music, mixing music. And that's what I went to school for. I went to the Park School of Communications at Ithaca College in Ithaca, New York. And that's where I studied like sound recording technology and sound recording for film and television and sound design for film and television and radio. And it was just like a few weeks into my program there where I really loved learning about the nuts and bolts of how film and TV sounds and how you make it sound good. But I realized I was kind of setting myself up for a life in studios, in very cold, dark basements of buildings all over the country. So, and I had been really lucky to grow up in with parents who appreciated and prioritized time spent outside and hiking. And New Jersey's not known for its beautiful nature, but if you've explored it at all, you know it does exist. And I was lucky to explore it a lot growing up. And I just wanted to find a way to kind of be more involved in ecology and conservation, work towards helping to try and preserve biodiversity and conserve kind of natural spaces while still holding on to this love of sound and sound recording. And that's how I found out about a man by the name of Gordon Hempton, who's an acoustic ecologist, who was kind of one of the pioneers of this, of the field of acoustic ecology. And Gordon really realized decades ago that we're losing the ability to listen to nature without noise pollution, which at the time in the 80s was like a pretty far-fetched idea, that we could work to preserve sound or that noise pollution was an issue. And he's worked for all of his career to kind of bring that to light. And I really fell in love with him and his craft and this idea that when we are in a place that is quiet, that lacks noise pollution, it connects us to that place on a deeper level, like Brook was saying. And so I decided that I would head down that path and essentially try to devote myself to researching places and the noise that impacts them, particularly wilderness areas and national parks and preserves and all the different types of land management that we have. And help kind of steward soundscapes as a way of conserving land. It was It has not been a super straightforward road. It's a pretty niche field. And as a result of my kind of nonprofit Quiet Parks International background, I also work as a sound designer and a film producer, working for clients who need sounds for their films, who need sound recordists for their films, as well as kind of directing and producing films myself. So in short, that's kind of how I landed here. I've spent a lot of time traveling around not only the country but the world, recording soundscapes and recording these what I call the vanishing quiet places. And it's been a really incredible way to spend time outside through this auditory lens of listening and listening for noise pollution. I think what a lot of people don't realize, and is something I can talk about a little bit more in depth later in the presentation, is that the soundscape is a great indicator for the overall health of an ecosystem. When we find soundscapes that are mostly intact and feature rich biodiversity of native species, a lack of noise pollution, we also find that they lack other types of pollution, like water contamination, soil contamination, their air quality is good, things like that. So sound's a really powerful tool, not just for people like myself and Brooke who like quiet, but also for nature. Nature needs to communicate just like we communicate, and it can only do that in quiet places. So in 2018 or so, myself and a few other people around the world founded an organization called Quiet Parks International. In short, we're trying to, and we are in some ways a sister organization to Dark Sky International, where we want to put places on the map that are quiet, and raise awareness of quiet as a resource, because we really feel like when we save quiet, we save everything else. That organization stemmed from decades of other nonprofit work that we had been doing in this space that were kind of local and specific to certain parks or certain areas. But we just found that the world was craving this on an international scale. And so it's been really amazing to see how folks have responded over the past 6 to 8 years to this work. And I have people who work with me literally all over the world on every continent to save quiet because they recognize it's important as a resource, not only for human enjoyment of places, but also for the ecosystems themselves. They need quiet to be successful and to thrive. Quiet Parks International has a lot of different program areas, we call them. My program area that I head is called Wilderness Quiet Parks. So I'm really looking at far reaches in wilderness areas. We have an urban quiet parks program that looks to recognize quiet places in urban areas. We have quiet conservation areas, quiet trails, lots of different kind of subgenres of Quiet Parks International, each which kind of look to recognize and designate or award different land types that fall under different scientific criteria that we've created to measure quiet. And that leads to the biggest question that we get is like, what is quiet? And like, is it a measurable scientific phenomena? Is it a feeling? Is it a state of being? And the answer is yes to all those questions. We have developed and are continually working to develop ways of measuring quiet. And when I talk about quiet, I'm not necessarily talking about an absence of sound. I'm really talking about an absence of noise pollution. So when you're in the Amazon jungle, it's a cacophony of insects and birds and monkeys and all sorts of things happening. It's loud and it's raucous, but if it doesn't have noise pollution, we can consider it quiet. So that's an important kind of point is when I'm talking about quiet. I'm not just talking about like recording studio silent. I'm talking about a lack of noise pollution. And while we know that we can measure quiet using a lot of different metrics that some people find really fascinating and some people find somewhat boring, depending on our program area, what we also know is that quiet is a feeling that we have that we can actually feel. It's very similar to what I describe as if anyone's familiar with the Danish word hygge. which is a word that doesn't have a direct translation to English, but it's a feeling that you have. And hygge can be felt when you're having dinner with loved ones or meeting up with an old friend for a walk. Quiet is something that you know when you feel. And when you feel it, you recognize its power and you recognize its importance. And I know in my life, when I'm in quiet places, it's easier to feel quiet. And it's easier to be a better listener when you're in a quiet place. And I think a big part of my motivation for this work is that I think we're all better people when we experience quiet and when we can listen better. We do a lot of talking in this world, and when we can do more listening, I think we'd be a little bit better off. So we really cast a wide net with Quiet Parks International and have said to anyone and everyone, regardless of where you live, if it's a quiet place, if you know what quiet is, any of those things, we said, okay, if you appreciate quiet, come on in, help us figure out where are these quiet places around the world. And we have over 300 suggested places. These are what we call nominated places. And this map is actually a little bit old. So this is just showing, as of, I think, maybe about a year ago, all the nominations that we've had. People can nominate places through our website. You don't need to have any qualifications to nominate a place. This essentially just puts a pin on the map for us to start researching. Anytime someone puts a pin on this map, essentially it gets sent to one of the program directors, if it's an urban area or if it's a wilderness area, and we start researching from abroad to try and figure out, okay, could this be a quiet place? And I'll get a little bit more into the criteria of what the scientific measurable kind of criteria is for quiet. But I just love showing people this map because this comes from the community of folks around the world who care about quiet. And before I started Quiet Parks International, I didn't know that there was a lot of people like me who really cared about quiet and who really recognized it as a valuable part of their experience in their daily lives. And certainly through this organization, it has taught me that people really care about quiet. And it's continued to show me that quiet's in danger and we need to continue to work to preserve it and raise awareness of it. The world is super loud. It's been loud for a while. It's only going to keep getting louder. On the left-hand side of the screen here that you see is just a random day. I took a screenshot of the live air traffic that's happening around the world. And it's rather frightening. This also isn't all the planes that exist. These are just the ones that have a certain, it's called an ADS-B. It's a certain radar ping turned on. These flight radars you can find online for free. You can look at what airplanes are currently overhead at any given time. There's a lot of air traffic happening. In 2017, there was a pretty big study from the World Bank that said that almost 4 billion people flew on airplanes, and it's expected to double in the next few decades. And on the right-hand side of the screen here is just a similar shot of all the ships in the oceans at any given. This was like a random Tuesday. I took this screenshot. So when we think that we can go off to an island in the middle of the ocean or go to the southern reaches of our planet or the Arctic or something, it's very hard to find quiet. It's hard to find places that are free from noise pollution. Shipping traffic has grown, I think they said 300 to 400% between 1992 and 2014. We're just seeing exponential increase of shipping traffic and air traffic as the years go on. So if we don't do something to recognize this resource soon, it unfortunately will most likely disappear, especially in places like the United States and in Europe. Unfortunately, it is almost extinct according to our criteria. But we need to find the quiet places and recognize them soon, or else we will not have the ability to keep them quiet. It's easier to find a place that's quiet and keep it quiet than to take a noisy place and try and undo FAA air traffic patterns and military exercise areas and shipping lanes and things like this. So when we can put on the map these last quiet places and work to protect them, empower local communities to protect them, we really feel like it's a stronger way of going about conservation. I'll talk a little bit about why noise is bad for humans, which there's a lot of kind of bullets on this slide here. I'll highlight a few, which is that the World Health Organization has said that we lose at least 1 million healthy years of life every year from traffic-related environmental noise, and that was in Europe. But noise pollution is bad for us. People who work in noisy environments have higher rates of cardiovascular issues. They report higher levels of disrupted sleep. Our children are acutely affected by noise, both in the classroom and out of the classroom. We didn't evolve to exist in a noisy world as a species. And again, this is just talking about humans. If we want to talk about the effects on wildlife, there's some really interesting studies about owls and how owl habitat is extremely endangered by noise because owls are auditory hunters. They can hear for hundreds of yards away, and even the slightest bit of noise pollution can have that feeding ground for them. Species like sage grouse and ruffed grouse, if you've ever heard them or heard their drumming, you understand that sound is a really important part of how they communicate in the environment, and that frequency of sound overlaps with traffic really well, and we've seen those populations decline a lot. So it's not just humans who are annoyed by sound. It's actually bad for humans, and it is bad for wildlife. And it's also in some ways like the antidote to all of those things is quiet. When we've studied quiet in medical settings and things like this, we understand it's good for us. It lowers our stress hormones. It restores our attention. It allows us to sleep better. It can enhance things like outdoor recreation opportunities and family outings and developing connections with people. These things all exist more successfully in quiet. If you've ever, lots of people use like nature sound apps to fall asleep to or work to. Those things are grounded in science, and science is telling us that quiet is good for us. Noise is bad, quiet is good. And every year there's more studies that come out that kind of show us what we're now starting to really understand, that the world is noisy, it's bad for us, quiet is good, and we should have more quiet in our lives. Most of us, even if we live in non-major urban or metropolitan areas, are exposed to unhealthy levels of noise when we sleep. If you've ever slept in a really quiet place and gotten used to the quiet, which a lot of us are not, you know how powerful that can be for sure. Yeah, it's kind of a very interesting way to think about your life. A lot of people don't take the time to listen to where they are and what's going on around them. And that's because we are used to having non-pleasant auditory environments. If you even just take a moment right now and think about what you're hearing. Like, I'm in this hotel room, I hear the air conditioner, I hear a dehumidifier, there's a road right on the side of the hotel. Very rarely do we find these moments of quiet. And when we start to intentionally bring those quiet moments into our lives, whether it's physical quiet or that kind of mental quiet, like I was speaking about, through all sorts of things that people find quiet in doing, our lives get better when we can kind of find that quiet. I'm gonna just describe or share a few places that have been awarded wilderness quiet park status. And what a wilderness quiet park means is a little bit more concrete than, let's say, an urban quiet park, because we do have this scientific criteria that we've set up. And to explain it in really simple terms is that we are measuring something when we take data on these places, these wild places. We're measuring for something called a noise-free interval, which is just the amount of time between noise pollution events. So if a plane passes over, as soon as that plane's out of auditory range, we start a timer. As soon as the next noise pollution event comes in, we stop the timer. Wilderness quiet parks need a dependable 15-minute noise-free interval. That's it. We just need to say 15 minutes of quiet at a time is what you can expect when you visit this place, which seems pretty easy in some ways. You just think, okay, 15 minutes. And I can say with almost 100% certainty that there are less than 10 places in the United States that meet that criteria. And there'll be less than 30 probably in the entire world that meet that criteria. It is incredibly hard to get just a few minutes of quiet. And even in places that I've thought, oh, this seems like a quiet place, when I set up measurement equipment and I'm actually measuring noise pollution, my ears have been lying to me. And in fact, sound travels in incredible ways that's really hard to predict. And really only measurement equipment, like is pictured here in this photo, can pick up those frequencies at times. For instance, I've recorded freight trains from 15 miles away. I've recorded airplanes from many, many miles away, 15, 20 miles away. And when you think about one freight train, running through a valley or something, if I can measure it from 15 miles away in one direction, imagine the radius of sound that's casting. So it's just really hard to find. It's really hard to find these quiet places. American Prairie Reserve in Montana is one of these places. It hasn't been officially awarded as a wilderness quiet park yet. However, that is coming soon. American Prairie Reserve it's a private reserve slash nonprofit in northeastern Montana. They've been working. They have a lot of incredible work, but one of the things they're doing is working to restore native bison habitat throughout Saskatchewan and the northern United States. That was destroyed, and the bison were extirpated as the West was colonized. If you ever have a chance to go to American Prairie Reserve, I can tell you it's one of the most incredible natural prairie habitats that exist in the United States, and they've been working to restore that natural prairie habitat to its pre-colonial state. And it's one of the only places that you can really experience that in the country. And it's such a unique ecosystem. It's one of the few places you can experience it in the world. Here in American Prairie Reserve, I would commonly have noise-free intervals measured in hours, not minutes, which even for someone like myself is really miraculous, really, really incredible. Another place would be the Amazon jungle in Ecuador. I visited Ecuador and specifically the Kofan tribe along the Rio Agorico in 2021. And maybe unsurprisingly, the Amazon jungle does have a lot of quiet. This quiet is particularly threatened by oil extraction, by just by development in general, but especially by oil extraction. You can record these oil drilling operations, these oil rigs, these platforms from 10 miles, 15 miles away because the sound is such a low frequency. And not only does the wildlife in the Amazon obviously need it to communicate, but the native folks in the Amazon also, the way that they use sound to communicate to each other and with their environment and to gather information about their environment is really, really incredible. And when they lose quiet, they lose touch with their ancestral homelands and their ways of being. So visiting them, being a guest of theirs and helping them to kind of steward quiet, which is a resource they've been working to steward for a long time, has been definitely one of the greatest honors of my career. And if anyone is looking for a great, responsible way to see the Amazon jungle, the Kofan lead small groups of folks out there. So just a shameless plug for the Kofan tribe in the Amazon jungle. It's a really incredible way to see the Amazon for sure. Another location which I visited more recently, about a year and some change ago, is in Costa Rica, which is a little bit easier to get to than the Amazon jungle. I spent about 3 weeks traveling around Costa Rica in 3 different ecosystems, all of which were incredible. However, the Osa Peninsula, which is kind of the southern, there's a southern kind of peninsula that juts off the coast of Costa Rica, is home to an abundance of quiet. There's no roads that really transverse this peninsula, which is home to a national park. You can only kind of hike into it, and you can only hike into it with a guide, actually. So you can have really immense quiet here on the Osa Peninsula in Costa Rica as well. The last place that I'll talk about is one that's close to me here in northern Minnesota, or where I live, not here in Miami, but where I live in northern Minnesota, the Boundary Waters Wilderness Canoe Area, which is only accessible by canoe or some hiking trails. However, I wouldn't recommend hiking through the Boundary Waters. I think if you're going to do it, certainly get yourself a canoe. But it's one of the most incredible wilderness areas that we have in this country, and seeing it by canoe is a real treat. And the Boundary Waters is home to a lot of incredible sounds. One of my favorite is the loon calls, especially this time of year, where loons will sing. And if you've never heard a loon call, it's worth looking up. And their echoes can travel for miles around these lakes. And in the Boundary Waters, you can also have hours of noise-free interval. And all these places, but in particular the Boundary Waters as well, is under threat from the establishment of new mining leases, as well as the increase of air traffic. So part of what I think I'm doing, what I'm hoping to do, is to be able to catalog these places and then see how they change over time. So, for example, in the Boundary Waters, I go multiple times a year and collect data. And sometimes that data tells me things, and sometimes it doesn't. If anyone's ever worked in data collection before, it's not always a straightforward puzzle. But what I can see, both in the Boundary Waters, in the Amazon jungle, in places like American Prairie Reserve, is that even in my decade or so of collecting data, which isn't that long, they're becoming noisier. And we're seeing those impacts play out in all sorts of different ways around these ecosystems. I have a lot of good quiet place recommendations. Some of them haven't been awarded, like these I've just mentioned. Some of them I've just been to or am currently researching, and love to share those places with people. Because I think when we visit quiet places, the need to protect them becomes very self-evident. And so if you've never been to a quiet place before, I encourage you to find a quiet place near you. You can use our website. You can shoot me an email. I can try and direct you to quiet places. If you know of a quiet place, also send me an email because I want to know about it and I want to help protect it with you. And that's kind of what I offer folks through Quiet Parks International. Is like soundscape ecology is not a super well-known form of resource protection. It's not a super straightforward tool to use. I want to help different land management agencies, private landowners, and just like engaged community members work to protect quiet wherever they are. Quiet Parks International is completely volunteer. None of our program directors are paid or on salary. All of our volunteers, the hundreds of them around the world, all just do this because we all deeply connect to this idea that we need to preserve quiet. This is a crucial part of what it means to have these beautiful ecosystems, is to be able to listen to them and to be able to experience them without noise. And so what I'll say is, if you want to learn more about quiet, if you want to work to protect a place, just reach out. My email is matt@quietparks.org. I didn't put it in the slide. I'm sure there'll be a follow-up email or something, and I would love to hear from folks, or if you just want to talk more about it. I'm assuming a lot of people here are either from Pennsylvania or care about Pennsylvania based on our hosts here. And so the question I get for each time I do a presentation like this is like, oh, is where I live quiet? And so in this case, is Pennsylvania quiet? And I'm really excited that the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources is currently in talks with Quiet Parks International to engage in some preliminary soundscape evaluations of different wild areas around the state. This is really, this is like groundbreaking stuff that we have state conservation, natural resource folks reaching out to organizations like ours to help them interpret and protect these resources more effectively. And so if you're not aware, in Pennsylvania and you're a Pennsylvania resident, your PEA DCNR is doing a fabulous job. And I think hopefully within the next year or so, we're going to have hopefully some data to share about some of the quiet places in Pennsylvania, potential quiet places in Pennsylvania, and how we can work to protect that quiet. Some areas that I've been looking at personally, just remote research and in my quick visits to Pennsylvania, is like Hammersley, Stairway Wild Area is one, White Mountain Wild Area. We're hoping to kind of spread out throughout the state and collect data on a lot of different places, just to get a baseline of what is the state of quiet in Pennsylvania within these wild areas. But one thing that would be helpful for me is like folks on this call probably know this state a lot better than I do. And so if you feel like sharing some of your favorite places to go find quiet, I would love to hear about them and what that place kind of means to you. And even if it's a place that scientifically isn't quiet, if it's a place that means a lot to you and makes you feel quiet, that's important as well. Quiet's not just about the sound. Quiet's about all sorts of things. And I have a colleague whose name is Steve Orfield, and his work is really interesting. He runs they call it a multisensory research lab in Minneapolis. It's the quietest place in the world. It's a research lab that is so quiet that if you enter it, all you can hear is like your joints creaking and the like tinnitus in your ears. It's very disconcerting. However, he has really pioneered this thought that quiet is multisensory. The feeling of quiet is multisensory. It's not just about what you're hearing. It's about what you're seeing. It's about what you're smelling. It's about what you're feeling. It's about what you're tasting. Which when he first said that to me, I said, that's weird. And the more I thought about it, the more it really made sense to me. Because quiet, you can feel that quiet when you're sitting in front of a fire, drinking a cup of tea, or reading a good book, or taking a walk on a beach. So quiet can be found, and it's important that we find it now more than ever, I think. And like I said previously, I think it makes us all happier and better people. So I will leave you with, we do have time for question and answers, as was said at the beginning. I love questions, even if you think, maybe they're silly or something. Please, I want to hear your questions. And if you're not comfortable submitting them in the comments section of whatever platform you're on, please send me an email, matt@quietparks.org. I want to leave you with a quote from my mentor and my good friend, Gordon Hempton, where he says, "Silence is not the absence of something, but the presence of everything." And the quote continues on to say, "It is the presence of time, undisturbed. It can be felt within the chest. Silence nurtures our nature, our human nature, and lets us know who we are. Left with a more receptive mind and a more attuned ear, we become better listeners not only to nature, but to each other. Silence can be carried like embers from a fire. Silence can be found, and silence can find you. Silence can be lost and also recovered. But silence cannot be imagined, although most people think so. To experience the soul-swelling wonder of silence, you must hear it." So I'd just like to say thank you, and continue or start listening more, and be in touch. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Matt. That was very thought-provoking. We do have some questions in the chat. So I'd like to present them, and then I have a couple of questions myself. So let's jump into those right now. We had one question is, you talked about the boundary waters, and there was one of the Barbara who's listening visited the boundary waters for a week, and the number of visitors time was restricted. So her question is, what is making this wilderness more noisy as we struggle to keep mining out? Is it just the
Yeah,
mining, or are there other things contributing?
it's a really good question, Barbara. I hope to see you in the Boundary Waters at some point. So with a lot of wilderness areas, they're permitted entry for visitors, which is great. It's how we keep the character of these places. It's how we keep the resources intact. And it takes a lot of planning and privilege to be able to go get a wilderness permit and go canoe for a week through the Boundary Waters. The main threat to the quiet in the Boundary Waters is air traffic and the increase of air traffic. As more planes are in the sky, more passengers are in the sky, more airplanes fly. Those planes don't necessarily travel on direct kind of highways like we have for cars. They kind of have waypoints throughout airspace that they're allowed to navigate through depending on a lot of different factors. However, the FAA, who regulates airspace in the United States, isn't necessarily, their first priority is safety and their second priority is efficiency. Protecting quiet in national parks isn't necessarily something they have like the bandwidth to be able to work on. However, there are certain rules, like in the Boundary Waters and with some other wilderness areas as well. You can't fly any aircraft under 5,000 feet of elevation, which does help, but 5,000 feet isn't also that high. So you can still have sightseeing tours over our national parks and our wilderness areas as long as they adhere to those kind of altitude restrictions. But as we see more and more development in different transportation sectors, we see less and less quiet in these wilderness areas. Something like mining, like if a new mine opened up, which is being proposed right in the headwaters of the Boundary Waters, which isn't necessarily the wilderness area, but it's right on the border, we will see that sound emanate throughout the wilderness area to the tune of potentially 10, 15 miles, which will have a massive impact on the soundscapes there. And that's not even mentioning the other potential environmental impacts that a mine in the headwater of the Boundary Waters could have. So I step off of my high horse, but I will say that it's getting harder to find these quiet places for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, and sometimes I found that you think a place is quiet. We filmed a video on the role of quiet in Pennsylvania, and Pam will put that into the chat. And the irony is we went to a park that I thought was really quiet, and we had to stop recording numerous times because of air traffic. So, I mean, it just reinforces what you're saying.
Absolutely.
A question that Kate asked, natural sounds are not considered unquiet. You're really talking about human sounds create the unquiet. Does the recording equipment capture frequencies that humans don't consciously hear that are human made?
That's a great question, Kate. So the range of human hearing is around 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, which is a bunch of nerd information if you don't care. There's a lot of sound happening outside of those frequencies. And yes, our recording equipment does sometimes capture those sounds that are either infrasound, which is below that 20 hertz threshold, or ultrasound, which is above that 20,000 hertz threshold. Species like bats communicate ultrasonically. If you've ever maybe heard bats before or heard recordings of bats, they're incredibly difficult to hear. Most of us who are over 35 or 40 years old actually can't hear bats anymore because we've lost that ability to hear them. However, I've recorded them so many times, you can see them because the microphones are sensitive enough to capture those frequencies that humans can't hear. But just because humans can't hear it doesn't mean it doesn't impact wildlife. So to answer your question, we are taking into account these frequencies that humans can't hear if it potentially impacts wildlife and their ability to communicate, like infrasound and ultrasound.
So Matt, I had a question. You talked about the 15-minute interval between noise as being the top tier. Do you have other tiers that you're identifying and recognizing? And does having a designation help ward off noise in any way?
Um, So yeah, two kind of points. One is so the Wilderness Quiet Parks criteria and the testing criteria is publicly available, so I can send it to anyone. It's not posted on our site yet, but it's coming very soon. We essentially test in an area that's free from what we'd call like constant ecological sound. So like we wouldn't record right next to a river or a waterfall or like a geothermal pot or something. So we're really trying to measure that 15-minute noise-free interval with the largest acoustic horizon possible. That testing also happens early in the morning because the atmosphere is rarefied, so sound travels a lot better, things like that. So we're really trying to maximize the scope of what we're hearing during those testing periods. We also, when we talk about an award, only Congress can designate something. So for Wilderness Quiet Parks, we're not designating parks, we're awarding parks. We can certify parks, and then in other countries we can designate things. So that's always a point I make because I got in trouble with the National Park Service once for saying I was designating a place. However, some of these other program areas run the gamut. For things like urban quiet parks, we don't look at noise-free interval. We're looking at overall decibel level and much more of a subjective experience. So can I hear my footsteps as I'm walking through the park? Can I talk with someone who's next to me without raising my voice? What's the maximum sound pressure level happening at any given moment within the testing period? We have another program area called quiet conservation areas, which has no scientific criteria. The only requirement is that there are people there who care about the quiet and want to talk about it. So we had our second quiet conservation area in the United States, just named a few months ago, Anza Borrego Desert State Park in California, which is east of San Diego by 2.5 hours. They were interested in a Wilderness Quiet Park award. I collected data for multiple years in a row. It wasn't going to meet that 15-minute noise-free criteria. However, the state park management and the local community care about quiet so much there. So giving them the Quiet Conservation Award gives them kind of another feather in the cap to say, like, this is an award that this place has been given and another reason why XYZ shouldn't be happening here, which kind of leads into the other part of the question, Marci, is about like, do these awards and these certifications prevent noise from happening and keep the places quiet? Yes and no. Similar to dark skies, certifications, and things like this, raising awareness helps protect the resource. However, there's nothing to stop your neighbor from turning on a spotlight every night as a security light and ruining your beautiful dark sky experience. So what we really hope is that these local communities can be empowered to have good conversations with potential noisemakers, with other members of their community, with the land managers, to keep stewarding the resources that they already likely care about. Most of these places that we are putting on the map, we're not putting them on the map really. I mean, these are places that people deeply care about this resource anyway. Our hope is to give them more tools and some like expert help to help them explain some of the risks that are associated with a new crypto mining facility or a new mine or something like this. We can put some real numbers and some real data to that using our kind of team of experts to help them fight these conservation fights that we all know we're encountering.
Thank you. And then somebody had posted a question and you had answered it in terms of you have a nomination form if somebody wants to nominate, but are there things they should be thinking about when they're listening? Because what I'm hearing now is like there's a spectrum of like, you know, your parks, and then you've got your conservation areas. So what should people be thinking about before they nominate something for consideration?
I think really what I care most about, which is like, you know, my science background yells at me when I say this, but it's about like, how do you feel in this place? If you feel quiet in a place and you think it could use some form of awareness from quiet parks through one of our program areas, I want to have a conversation with you. For a lot of years, and still this is happening, is that conservation organizations have done a very top-down approach where they've said, okay, this place is important, we're going to protect it with no input from local community, with no input from indigenous communities, no input from anyone who might be affected by the conservation of that area. So my hope is that by trying to kind of flip that around and having people say, like, this place is important, it's my backyard, I want to protect it, I can help you protect your backyard, I hope. Or at least that's my intention. So yes, there are certain criteria that I have for certain program areas, but in the end, I want to talk to you about quiet. If you care enough about quiet where you're thinking about nominating a place, let's hop on a call. Nothing brings me more joy than talking with other people who care about quiet, because I spend a lot of time alone deep in the woods. So it brings me a lot of joy to talk to other people who care about this.
Cool.
Thank you.
Marci, may I?
Question.
Yeah. So Matt, obviously KTA is a trails organization, and we're really focused on hiking. And I wondered if in any of your work, have you looked at a trail for its quiet values, quiet or levels, and if I'd be curious to know about those experiences. But then, how might one go about protecting that if it's a linear feature and obviously it goes for miles potentially?
Absolutely, that's a great question. So we have a program area called Quiet Trails. It's run by a colleague of mine. His name's Nick McMahon, and I should connect you guys because you'd have a great conversation. But Quiet Trails, the program really recognizes that, yeah, trails are not necessarily one point on a map, and the experience can vary. You start in a parking lot and you could hike deep into the woods and you end in a parking lot probably. But it's about that kind of journey. I think just like with lots of our program areas, when you start to make people aware of sound as a resource, it changes the way they move through the environment. So when I experience people who, and I'm sure everyone's going to understand what I mean when I say this, like, are listening to music as they're hiking on a trail, which is like a big pet peeve of a lot of us weird nature nerds, they're enjoying the place in their own way and they're having a quiet experience. And that's something I've had to wrestle with quite a bit, is that, like, my way of enjoying the place isn't necessarily better than theirs. I think they're just maybe unaware of the fact that they're potentially causing harm to the ecosystems by doing that, but also degrading someone else's enjoyment of the place. When you can engage someone like that in a conversation about quiet as a resource, I'd say almost 100% of the time people are pretty receptive and they're like, wow, I just never thought of that. And I get that so much in my work when I tell people what I do. Oh my God, I never thought of that before. I had no idea. And I think the more we can raise awareness about quiet as a resource, especially when it comes to hiking and our use of these areas, because it's our responsibility to keep them quiet if we're entering these spaces. Because I also get the question, well, by bringing people to quiet places, don't you make them noisy? And our whole national park system is based upon this idea that if you give people access to a resource, that they actually become good stewards for that resource in lots of other places in their lives. So that's what I hope. And yes, we have quiet trails, a number of them throughout the United States and abroad. There's even like water trails, like the Niobrara River in Nebraska is a quiet trail, which is a beautiful, very unheard of kind of part. Marci knows.
Yeah,
So there's some really beautiful kind of journeys through quiet that quiet trails allow you to do.
Thank you.
I have to say my favorite quiet spot that I've been to is the Wabakimi Provincial Park in Ontario. You literally you drive north from Minnesota to the road ends, and you get on a train, and you give the train a mile marker, and it dumps you and all of your gear out.
Oh my
And
gosh, I just had to Google this.
so it's huge. Occasional
Wow.
float plane comes by. You may or may not run into another paddler, but we were there for 9 days and didn't run into anybody.
Oh my gosh, that looks amazing.
So
That looks
highly
really
recommend it.
incredible.
That's really cool.
So, we had, somebody made a comment in terms of, light pollution has effects, artificial light that disrupts melatonin. And there is some conversation. There's a piece of legislation in the General Assembly right now about lights and light pollution. But outside of nominating a park or a trail or a conservation area, what can people do to help preserve quiet outside of having conversations with people about their music?
Yeah, polite, nice conversations with people about wearing headphones. Um, there has been a period of time where we tried a more legislative approach to this conservation of this resource. Um, and we quickly realized it was probably not the best way. And when I say that, I mean engaging with folks like the FAA and the National Transportation Safety Board and things like that to try and recognize, like, hey, it wouldn't actually cost you that much more money to fly around wilderness areas. It's just not, again, it's just not really in their priorities as the organizations. There are certain times where we've seen that work, like in the Boundary Waters, where they've been able to enact flight restrictions and things like that. But for the most part, it is kind of talking to your neighbor. And that is a bit more powerful. I think personally, like how you can kind of go about trying to preserve quiet. One is just being mindful of it as a resource, and thinking about like, okay, it's not just about what I'm experiencing. What is this wood thrush experiencing right now? How does the wood thrush use sound in its communication? How does the ruffed grouse use sound to communicate and find mates and sense prey and things like that? Because it gives you a broader understanding of how each of the species in your ecosystem can kind of use this shared resource. And the other thing is that when we all recognize something is important together, and when a community recognizes something's important together, it gives that place more of a voice. If folks like KTA didn't exist, we would have lost a lot more places by now. But because different trail building organizations and outdoor alliances and park sister organizations exist, they kind of help bring the community together to protect places and protect resources that are important and can connect the dots for us. And that's what we're all kind of trying to do in all of our work, I think, right? It's like continue to protect these places, to give people access to them, and connect the dots so we don't lose these places. And we can all only do so much. But I met a guy who worked in telecommunications and hadn't really thought about quiet before. And like a month after our conversation, he sent me a message saying that he'd been thinking about it so much, and he designed a remote listening system for me to deploy among quiet parks. I mean, it was just absolutely wild. And that has happened to me time and time again, where this conversation about acknowledging that, like, oh, I haven't actually been paying attention to what I'm hearing when I'm outside. It's kind of a scary place. It's a scary thing to recognize. And then once you do recognize it, it becomes really empowering because places that you visited hundreds of times become new. And there's a new way of appreciating them and a new layer to their beauty. And the more we can do that with people, the more successful we're going to be in continuing to have these places to visit with our grandchildren and for future generations and things like that. It's not really about, I like to protect the Boundary Waters because it's my backyard and it's quiet and that's great. It's about a lot more than that, for sure. It's a shared resource. It's a shared value that we all have.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. I do want to put a plug in for our next book club book. I don't know if you've read Ed Young's An Immense World. And that's the next book we're discussing for the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation book club. And it really explores how different animals use their senses. So, hearing just being one of those senses, and how what we might perceive as not disruptive could be very disruptive to other species.
Yeah. And to think, like, when we say hearing or listening, an ant doesn't necessarily listen, but it does feel sound.
Yes,
in a
good
really
point.
interesting way. So books like that, I haven't read it, but I've heard about it. It can it changes the way you look at the world that we all live in. And stuff like that's really amazing. There's another author by the name of David Haskell who talks a lot about sound, but also just aspects of that kind of conservation and ecology that are really interesting.
Excellent. Wrote that name down. Book for future reference. Is there anything that you would like to end on as we come to the end of our time?
I just appreciate everyone listening. And yeah, every time I give a talk like this, I just feel like there's a community of people and we all care about some of the same stuff. And that feels really good. And to reach out again, I can't say it enough. Please, if you want to have a conversation, I just love meeting people and talking with people about these beautiful places that we all get to enjoy. So please reach out to me, matt@quietparks.org. And if you want to volunteer or anything, just reach out.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Brooke, anything you'd like to say?
No, I just want to express my appreciation, Matt, for your time tonight and all your insights on these really important issues. Yeah, I mean, I hope everyone takes note of the importance of quiet when they're out enjoying nature and exploring our trails and visiting our parks. It's so important. And I think you've stoked our interest in that issue a lot.
Excellent.
Great. Well, thank you
Thank
so
you,
much for
Brooke.
having me. I really do appreciate it.
And from the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation, we too want to thank you, Matt, and our friends at KTA for co-hosting this presentation this evening. I would encourage you to share the presentation with others. That's part of the conversation that Matt was talking about, at helping people to understand the role of quiet and the resources that are available to them. And maybe they have a favorite place that they'd like to nominate as well. So thank you for everybody for joining us this evening. We know that you have lots of demands on your time, and we're very thankful that you chose to be here with us to learn about quiet parks. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye.